Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by JP Mason and Declan McConville. Welcome back to the Bulletin, guys. How's your week been?
Afternoon.
It's nice, sun's out, Paul, and we're here to talk about the Celtic, so yep.
We are here to talk about the Celtic. There's plenty to discuss, as always, Declan. We've not spoken to you guys since the same time last week. We've got a wee game coming up at the weekend. Transfer kind of rumours, as you would expect, incomings, outgoings, and that big question mark around what are Celtic doing at the moment for a new manager. Because, you know, the big thing for me is last week we spoke about the upheaval, even just in the personnel. And we'll kick off the show, Declan, by talking about Vincent Angelini. Tell me, what's your thoughts? The young goalkeeper, who I think is now 17. He is the grandson of Quality Street kid Davy Hay. Very highly rated goalie, but it looks as though he could be the second highly rated teenage goalkeeper that we lose to an English club. What's your update on that one?
It's very upsetting. Past couple of years, this whole season, we just seem to be using an array of young talent. Cameron Harper away over to America as well. There's been other guys that have went out the door this season. It shows, Paul, that at the club there is issues really deep-rooted, and it's not just in the first team. In terms of a youth system and a youth setup, guys don't want to be there, and that needs to be solved very quickly. And that's why I don't know why we're still at the point where, Champions League qualifiers are still nearing. The league is gone. It's time to change stuff and get the ball moving, because if we don't, we're just going to keep losing key personnel and young players, which is really disappointing going forward for the future and trying to build for the future.
It is. This all ties into various other aspects that we'll talk about, JP, but it's something I think on a Celtic State of Mind, we've been banging a drum about it for some time, the youth aspect. Is it fair to say, JP, that when things are going as well as they have done over the preceding 9 seasons, when you're winning invincible trebles, when you're winning quadruple trebles, there's a lot of fans who maybe don't look under the surface of the first team and say, what are we doing in terms of youth development? Are there a lot of fans who simply are happy with the success, regardless of whether we buy the young talent in or if we nurture our own? What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's probably been, I think I've said this before, there's been probably a lot of more short-term thinking at the club in the last few seasons because of the albatross that was all of them, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row. We fell at the hurdle for 10, but I think that is, if you look at the amount of players we've signed that haven't done anything really at the club, that have made no mark, and you think, well, why couldn't a youth player have been given that opportunity rather than these players that we've brought in? So I think there's been that kind of. We've been hamstrung a little bit by that, and I hope that going forward that now that that's gone and we're back to just concentrating on everything about Celtic rather than just this sort of holy grail, so to speak, then we can actually focus on the youth.
Well, I take the point that Celtic fans, you want success. But there is a real tradition in rearing our own players. And someone mentioned when this was a discussion topic during the week that, we sold Kieran Tierney for 25 million quid, so that pays for 10 years of youth development, so it's worth it. I don't buy that, because that's just, that's one over a number of seasons that we've brought through who had a sale on value. Now, we're producing player after player, and this kind of ties in as well, Declan, with the conversation that Colin Watt had just the other day around the Colts team being included in the pyramid. And again, it's something that I've spoken about before, because Jock Stein, as forward thinking as Jock Stein was, back in 1968 actually made a proposal to the league that he wanted second string. At that time it was a Quality Street gang to play in the second division. There were only 2 divisions in Scotland at that time. It finally got knocked back due to a vote by Partick Thistle, believe it or not. They had the decisive vote in the end, and they voted against the idea of having a Celtic Colts team in the league. All these years later, and other countries have adopted what Jock Stein was trying to implement. All these years later, we're in a situation where we're certainly not giving these young players a pathway, Declan. So they're looking down south. It's not all about money. I mean, I know that the finances down there are vastly superior to what we have here in Scotland, but they're looking down there because there seems to be more of a pathway. We've already lost a number, and we've spoken about the players we've lost to Liverpool, Man City, Blackburn Rovers, Bayern Munich, and it looks as though, Vincent Angelini will go to a club. It may not be Brighton. There's been interest in Roma. His father's Italian. He's obviously got links to Italy. So for me, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, in 5-6 years' time, the half a dozen or so young players we've lost could have been the nucleus of our side. And moving into a situation, JP, where we're not going to be splashing as much cash, I don't think anyone is, moving on into the next 3-5 years. And also the fact that we're going to have restrictions in terms of who we sign, because we're moving into a post-Brexit era in relation to transfers in football. It seems to be that we're at a stage where it's too late. We're going to lose all the current crop. They're all going to go. There's a few that are a wee bit older than that. You mentioned one earlier, Declan, who already had first team experience. He's away to New York Red Bulls, I think, isn't he?
Yep.
Cameron Harper. We've also got Okaflex. We've got Dembele, who just a few years ago was the prodigy. He was being spoken about all over European football. There was a tug of war between Scotland and England as to who could cap him. Yet we're going to lose all of these guys. Now, this actually feeds into a couple of different discussion topics. The first one being the Colts discussion, which we could have, but the other one would be that we're moving into a situation where we're appointing a director of football and a head coach, JP, and this whole discussion could be part of the strategy moving forward. We want to build not only a team that's winning right now, but we want to build a whole structure at the football club whereby the guys that we're signing at the moment, who might be 15 or 16, in 2 or 3 years' time, we want them to be first team ready. And we want there to be a conveyor belt. Now, that's the kind of thing, if you look at some of the in-depth interviews given by the likes of Ralph Rangnick, for example. There's a great interview that he gave to Coaches' Voices. Check that out. You'll find them on Twitter. And then Jesse Marsh, who's obviously been speaking to the media over the last few days, they speak about having this kind of vision where they're actually building something, not just the 11 players on the park, which I believe was all Neil Lennon was interested in. But there are other managers like Rafa Benitez, who Carragher reckons is all that he's interested in. JP is the 11 guys on the park on match day. So I think if we're looking towards the football landscape, we're looking to a new structure, that's the kind of thing that we could actually sell to someone like Jesse Marsh. Now, we said yesterday on the podcast, Ralph Rangnick and Marsh obviously know each other. They've worked together. Could that be the dream team? For me, it would be the absolute utopia if we were to appoint those two. And people are writing off Rangnick because they reckon the deal's already done with Schalke. And that's not the case. The deal hasn't been done. There's a lot of upheaval at Schalke at the moment. And I've actually approached Talking Fußball, which is a tremendous German podcast, who spoke to Axom a couple of years, but in fact 3 years ago, when I think we were playing Mönchengladbach, I think it was at the time, for an interview so they could fill us in and give us an update on the Schalke situation. So hopefully we'll have them on in the next couple of days. What's your thoughts, JP? Let's sell this vision. Let's sell a vision to a management team, a director of football and head coach, that we actually want to do something, not just domestically, but we want to build a team that could make an impression in Europe, and it might take 3 to 5 years to do that. We need domestic success, of course we do, but this longer term vision is what I think many Celtic fans are looking towards, JP, which would cross off some of the names that are on the banner at the bottom of the page here, especially Roy Keane.
Oh, well, I'd do that anyway. I would do that regardless. And no disrespect to any of them. It's just, I think I've not given my thoughts on Roy Keane. Roy Keane will always be an absolute god to me. Manchester United legend. Scored that header in the semi-final, knowing that he wasn't going to be able to play in the final.
Was that against Juve?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, he was tremendous that night.
I can remember that night so well, and just being so delighted that they were getting to the final. So Roy Keane, and obviously his punditry is brilliant as well. He's got a great patter on the TV, but when you've not managed the club for 10 years and your previous clubs are, Ipswich and Sunderland, it's not, that doesn't fill me with any, particularly at this point in time in Celtic's history, to a point Roy Keane would be folly, I would think. But the Jesse Marsh thing, I started to watch some stuff about Jesse Marsh, and I'd never normally do that, watch stuff on YouTube about managers and coaches' voice stuff and all that, but I watched his coach's voice thing. I watched his halftime team talk against Liverpool when Salzburg were they were down 2-0 at halftime, and he was basically geeing them up, and it was interesting to watch. I like the cut of his jib. I think he's really intelligent, and he's trained under Ralph Rangnick. And I also found out, I don't know if you knew this, I just found this out about an hour ago, was that he had a link. Getting a pro licence is quite difficult to do, but he said he had contacts in Scotland, and that's how he got his pro licence. And then there's a clip of him at I don't know if it was Mark Hall or wherever the Scotland squad were training, but it was him and a bunch of other managers were all listening to Gordon Strachan speaking, and it was like Callum Davidson and Neil Simpson, and I can't remember who else was there, but Strachan's giving them a lecture basically about football. So he's obviously got some sort of in with Strachan. So I'm not putting two and two together and coming up with 5, but there's obviously some link there with Scotland as well. So who knows? But and I also think, just regards to the actual appointment, I wonder if you look back at Fergus McCann, when Fergus McCann left Celtic, he was booed onto the park to lift the flag. And I hated that day. That was my first day as a season ticket holder, and I was so annoyed that was what was happening, because it was not what I was about. I was pretty much shouting at folk around about me to stop booing. And so Fergus McCann left under that sort of cloud. Now, if Peter Lawwell was to go and walk out, and I know there's no flag to raise, obviously, but if Peter Lawwell was to take a bow in front of the Celtic support right now, it would be savage. It would be, if we could be in the stadium, I know for a fact that it would probably be about 70 or 80% of the crowd would boo him. But I wonder if Peter Lawwell maybe wants to leave us with, because is this going to be a Peter Lawwell managerial appointment, or is it going to be a Dominic Mackay? Is it Dominic Mackay's first or Peter Lawwell's last? So if Peter Lawwell wants to leave us with something that in 10 years' time people actually look back and go, well, think about what Peter Lawwell left us with as a manager. So I was just thinking about that. So.
No, I think some of the points are excellent, JP. The first one, you're talking there about the pro licence. Obviously, anyone coming from overseas to Scotland to get their licence needs a sponsor. And I remember what they do, obviously, the sponsor being a Scottish football club. And I remember speaking to Jimmy Calderwood. It was, obviously, he spent some time at Dunfermline. And I interviewed him during the period where Dunfermline were in administration. And I was fundraising actually to save Dunfermline Athletic, believe it or not. And we did an interview with Jimmy Calderwood, and he spoke about how when he came over from the Netherlands to get his pro licence, Rangers unsurprisingly sponsored him for that as well. And it was during that interview, believe it or not, that he actually admitted that he was offered the Dunfermline Athletic job by David Murray. And because the YouTube channel was so small at that time and hardly anybody watched the interview that I put out, it is on the YouTube channel if you want to go way back to whenever it was. No one really picked up on the fact that was a wee bit naughty and certainly against the rules of the SFA at that particular time. But then he repeated the story, I think, was it on the Tam Cowan show, Tam and Stuart Cosgrove?
And
it made headlines then, but actually gave me the exclusive. But yeah, Jimmy explained to me how that works, with regards to having a sponsor in Scotland, JP. Mm-hmm. So by all accounts, there's been an interview, I think yesterday, where Marsh has revealed that it was Celtic who was his sponsor when he came over to do the pro licence.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so there is that link with the club. He says it was through, I think, Red Bull. It was something to do with Red Bull that got that arranged. So he was well aware of Celtic, and obviously everybody knows he's been speaking about the club in glowing terms. But I just think the club is who we are. We've got the traditions, we've got the success. And that's a given, I think, for any managerial appointment. I think if you're going to try and bring in someone like Marsh, and obviously yesterday we spoke about Ranić as well, pipe dream, perhaps. By the way, I have emailed Ralph Ranić and asked him if he wants to do an interview with us, so that would be an interesting one. That would be a very interesting interview, and we'll see if he takes us up on it. But bear in mind, I did ask Peter Lowell last season for an interview, and that's still not happened. But I think you've got to sell the vision, as well as selling the club and the history and the fan base and everything that's special about Celtic. You've got to sell them this vision, and it can't just be we want to win the league every season. I don't think that would do it for them. I think you've got to have something a wee bit more in terms, Declan, of building sides from within to try and conquer Europe. Now that sounds lofty, and there's going to be many people looking at me thinking your head's in the clouds. But if you want to attract that type of managerial duo to the club, Declan, surely you've got to have that kind of ambitious vision.
Well, I looked at Derry's Fred on Twitter yesterday, and if you look at Marco Rose, he's made that progression from RB Salzburg to Gladbach, and he's now going to be Borussia Dortmund manager. So it's three, two big clubs in the Bundesliga that are probably giving Marco Rose a plan on what they want to achieve and what they want to do. Now, whether JC Marsh follows that progression like his predecessor did is another question. But I think, as you say, Paul, for a lot of top calibre managers, if you go back to Brendan's type of persona, they want a plan and they want a vision. They don't want just this idea of 11 men in the park and that's it, let's go and win the league title and that'll be it, we'll be content with domestic success. They want to make inroads in European football because I had a chat with Jim Craig the other day on the phone and we were talking about European football. He's been a great advocate of Celtic in European football, and again in the Ian Bankier's report the week before Neil Lennon resigned, he was talking about looking towards the future of European football. It's something we've spoken about a lot in this podcast. So to just sit in your hands and be happy with domestic success isn't going to do anybody any good. And as well as that, if you look back on the successful times under Gordon Strachan, Martin O'Neill and Brendan Rodgers qualifying for the Champions League, the domestic success just came naturally with that. So it's not a case of just looking towards domestic football. We need to look towards the bigger picture, and that's going to be in terms of what we can offer Jesse Marsh, not just the 11 men in the park, but in the background of what we want to achieve. Because at this point in time, I think it'd be great if we get a Colts team into League Two. I think that would be really beneficial for players getting a game. Again, it was a thing Jim Craig mentioned the other day when the Lions and that team had a week off. During the week, they would go and play teams around Scotland just to build up. He said probably the boss got a bung, but they get fuck all in his words. But it's all about building relationships, building camaraderie, and getting game time under your belt, which I think for a lot of the young boys have not got this season. So I think that would certainly build into the plans, and if that gets pushed through, it'd be great. But you cannot expect to land a top manager and just say to him, "There's 11 guys, what to win the league, and that's it," because nobody will take you up in that.
I think what's key is Celtic always carry this squad, some might say a bloated squad. By the end of the pre-season, it might not be that bloated, to be fair, but we have a lot of players, JP, when you look through the 9 league championship wins, the amount of kind of players who are surplus to requirements, and many of them are the kind of youngsters that are coming through, maybe from the age of, let's say, 18 to 21. You would expect them to be first team ready, and they're simply not. That is the issue, and that was why I always thought the Colts were a fantastic idea, because we don't have a reserve league and we never will. That is something we need to accept. Every ex-player that I've ever spoken to who played reserve team football spoke about that as being pivotal to their development. There was a point where they were no longer going to learn anything from their contemporaries. So they're playing against 18-year-olds, they're 18, they're going to win week in, week out and learn nothing. Then they get thrown into the reserve league and they're playing against a 32, 33-year-olds. I'll tell you one of the examples I got just the other week there. Kevin Thomas, remember he played with Hearts? Mm-hmm. He had a terrible knee injury, and his introduction to reserve team football was playing Motherwell, whose centre half was Alex McLeish. You know, and he said in that 90 minutes, JP, he learnt more about the game, the dark arts of the game as well, than he had done in the preceding, let's say, 3-4 years playing against boys. So that step up's no longer there, and it's a brilliant bridge between youth football, first team football. And I think we're in a situation, Declan, where it's not the fact that Angelini doesn't have dreams about playing for Celtic Football Club, and I think all the other young guys had the same dreams when they signed for the club. It's just the fact that we can't actually give them that gateway. We can't give them that pathway. There is no bridge between youth football and first team football. Down south, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about Maresca at some point. You know, you've got a whole host of young players playing in the under-23 league down there, and we've tapped into it. I mean, remember we signed Boyata. Was he not about 26-year-old? He'd only played about 40 professional football games. That side of things I don't agree with. I think you need to have the games in your legs by the time you're 20, 21. And then before you know it, you know, you've got a player like Boyata who's now probably 29, 30. He doesn't seem to have been around that long because it took him so long to break through. But we've got guys that are going down to the English leagues and beyond because we don't have the pathway. I also see the argument, JP, with these teams who think that, you know, because it's Celtic and Rangers, I think it was Peter Head made the point the other day that they, you know, the Scottish football's not there just to assist Celtic and Rangers. And I don't know, I think that's a flawed argument. I've got to say that. I do think that's a flawed argument. I think the youth academy at Celtic has produced so many players for all of these teams in Scotland. I mean, you look at just about all these teams in Scotland, and many of their players have, you know, part of their development has been at Celtic. There has been an investment in their players by Celtic when they were youth players. So I think to have that kind of attitude is wrong, but at the same time, there might be an argument in relation to where the Colts team drops in terms of where they start in the Scottish League. You've got a lot of these clubs who used to be junior clubs, JP, who might think, well, surely, you know, we've waited this long to be in the pyramid. Surely you can't leapfrog us and be 2 or 3 leagues above us and start at that level of Scottish football. Do you think it will happen, JP? And if so, do you think that is a good start in terms of Celtic producing players? Maybe not back to the same kind of regularity as the 60s and 70s. That was almost freakish in nature, but with some kind of regularity.
I mean, surely if there's any sort of resistance to it amongst the clubs who are going to have to step aside or accommodate a Colts team in their league or whatever, if there's any resistance to that, surely there must be evidence throughout the rest of Europe that can be presented to them to say, well, here's what happened in this country when they did it. Here is the results of that, and, you know, show how money is filtered down throughout the leagues in terms of. I know that I think it was Colin mentioned that there was a payment was made as a seasonal payment that's made to the league. I don't really know the mechanics of it, but there was a seasonal payment made to the league by Celtic and Rangers in order that they can have the Colts teams in the league. And I know there's obviously the glass ceiling that they can't get promoted beyond League One, which I find that a bit strange. I mean, not that it could ever happen that they could go beyond that, but I just think, well, you know, if they win it, then it's just like, oh well, what happens? Does the team that finished second or third, do they then get promoted? I don't really know how that works, but it just seems like they'll just perennially just be in that league and potentially winning it all the time. But I'd like to think it could be if it's been proven to be a success in other leagues in Europe, then surely to goodness then they could accommodate it here and put aside any sort of, oh well, you know, it's all about Celtic or Rangers. It should be the other way about. It should be about Celtic or Rangers using their size to be able to benefit Scottish football as a whole, rather than sort of bring it down or dilute it in any way.
The other thing, I'm going to throw this in as well, just on that point though, JP, going back to that original time that Declan and I were talking about, Jim Craig will remember it well. Celtic were sending sides all over Scotland, and so one example that springs to mind, they sent the reserve team to Recreation Park in Alloa, and if you were to compare the attendances that Alloa would have expected on any given Saturday or any given day against what they actually got that day, it was something like 8 or 9 times the attendance turned up to watch a Celtic reserve side. And on that particular day, Ward White scored a hat-trick, the dearly departed Ward, who passed away this year, at the beginning of this year, and he helped me out massively with that book, gave me a great interview. But it did show that wherever there was a team playing in green and white hoops, there was going to be an audience, there was going to be a fan base who would go and watch them all over the country. They even dipped into the markets down south, JP. I mean, they played a number of games down south. They played against Carlisle, for example, and beat them 5-2. Carlisle's first team. Celtic's reserve went down. On the back of that, Carlisle signed John Gorman, who was the promising left back, and they signed him. But what I'm not saying is that we've got the same standard of player that we did have back then. But unless we make these changes, we never will have. Every so often there will be the freak occurrence, as it has become. Your Kieran Tierney will break through. Forrest and McGregor, who will come up in the conversation later, are other examples, but these guys are now getting to their latter 20s. They're getting to that stage of their career. So where's the 24 and 25 year olds that should have come through? Where's the 22 and 23 year olds that should have come through? We've lost a couple of generations, which is a big concern. Then you ask the question, you're talking about the glass ceiling, JP. I don't know if you listened back. It was a wee while ago now, probably June, July time. We done a couple of really interesting interviews, one with David Lowe and one with Paul Smith. And we were speaking around the possibility of Celtic having a side in English football. Now, this is really relevant this week because there has been there has been a motion in place, and it's been accepted in principle around the Netherlands and Belgium, amalgamating, if you like. So a number of clubs from both countries amalgamating into one league. And that has obviously raised the old question around cross-border leagues, which Celtic fans have spoken about for many, many years. But those two interviews in particular, Declan, I think you'll probably remember them, spoke about Celtic's efforts to buy Wimbledon Football Club. JP, have I spoke to you about this before?
No, I remember that though. I do remember that. Was that around about the time that they were thinking about moving to Dublin?
Well, what happened with this? That there is a link. There is a link. So Sam Hammam, you'll remember him. Yeah. He was at Wimbledon during the crazy gang kind of time. He was looking to sell Wimbledon for 40 million quid. Celtic wanted to buy them for said price, and they had as far as valuing the playing staff, that had all been done. Celtic wanted to buy Wimbledon Football Club, change their registered address to Celtic Park, 95 Kerrydale Street, Glasgow, right? And basically become Celtic, change their name and become Celtic. What that would leave is a Celtic team playing in Scottish football, right? So, I'm looking at both situations, whereby they're looking at the cross-border leagues. Everybody keeps telling me that's off the table, that's not going to happen. The reason at the moment, JP, that it's off the table, and this is what came through on the David Lowe interview, is that they tried to test the system. So David Lowe and others bought Clydebank Football Club, and then they made a proposal to have Clydebank moved into the Irish League. They wanted them to be based in Dublin, and that's exactly what you said earlier. And that was going to be the Trojan horse. So they were going to test the water and test all the different regulations involved to see if a Scottish football club could play in the Irish League, and if so, that would be their case for putting Celtic into the English League. It all fell down after the 1998 World Cup, where there was a proposal and the powers that be realised this could open the doors. If Clydebank get into the Irish League, this could open the doors. And they created new rules just in 1998, JP, preventing this from happening. But what David did say, and what is relevant, is that all bets are off due to where we are in terms of the financial impact of the coronavirus on world football. And we've already seen moves, as I say, between clubs from the Netherlands and Belgium to try and create a new league. So Could we be looking at a situation in the future, although it sounds bizarre at this moment in time, where we have a club going by the name of Celtic playing in the English League?
I mean, that would be absolutely remarkable. I mean, is there any friction or resistance to the Netherlands and Belgium proposal, do you know?
Well, everything I've read so far has probably been on the positive side, but I haven't been looking around, the clubs or the fan bases of those clubs that would be left behind, JP. So, I mean, what would happen to the Scottish game? A lot of people would say, don't let the door hit you on the way out. A lot of fans would say that. It's interesting how other fans see Celtic and Celtic fans. But let's be honest here, in terms of revenue being gathered by sponsorship, broadcasting, and of course the attendances that Celtic take to all these grounds, it would be catastrophic to the Scottish game if Celtic were to leave the country and play elsewhere. But I'm just maybe joining up the dots and getting the wrong picture here. If you've got a Colts team and you still have you've still got a Scottish-based Celtic club playing in Scottish football, and we may be looking elsewhere. Going back to your point that you were talking about the appointment of a managerial team, JP, I just can't see a situation where Peter Lawwell is working in cahoots with Dominic Mackay. Surely there must be a liaison, there must be an engagement there.
Yeah, I mean, it's too big a job for him to just be like, I'm not interested in that, or I'm not concentrating or thinking about Celtic until the moment that my feet are under the desk. He must be involved in the negotiations to appoint a new manager, because he's the one that's going to be working with them going forward. So you're not going to just be like, oh well, I'll take whoever you find and I'll work with them. This is Dominic Mackay's legacy as well. He's got to hit the ground running. So, if Peter Lawwell, for example, was to just appoint Roy Keane and it wasn't what Dominic Mackay's choice would be, then he's left holding the baby, so to speak, and then we're set back another season, 2 seasons or whatever. So no, there has to be some involvement, but it's just about whose name's going to be on the I don't know how to say that. Who's going to be, getting the credit for it, so to speak. So that's what I'd be interested to know.
It'll be one of the ones, JP, where I didn't sign Patrick Klimala, but I'll take Sorrell. I signed Sorrell, but I wasn't responsible for Klimala. One of the ones where you take all the successes, but it was somebody else's fault if it doesn't work out. I mean, I just cannot see, Declan, a scenario where the outgoing and the incoming CEO are not. It's not a joint decision. Surely they're working together.
No, it needs to be a joint decision, Paul. I think as well, the fact that Dominic's coming from Scottish rugby points to a question of his experience in football so far. Whether you like Peter Lawwell or not, he's been around the game for a long, long time. He's got a lot of connections around the country and whatnot. So I imagine there will be a conversation between Peter Lawwell, Dominic Mackay and Dermot Desmond. And again, spoke about joining the dots up. We all know that Peter's son works for Manchester City. And when we start to think about Enzo Maresca, that could be one of the dots that are joined up. That, going back to what JP was saying earlier on, and that if Peter does leave, he might want to leave something positive at least. Although the legacy just now is in tatters, it could be a parting gift, and hopefully the parting gift's something positive that lets us build for the future. But I can't see a world where it's just Dominic Mackay that's picking the manager. There must be dialogue between the three of them going forward here, and that's why I think that Maresca might possibly be the man that comes in due to the link that Peter Lawwell has with Manchester City and the link that Celtic have built up with Manchester City in the past few years.
I mean, we've spoken about all the possibilities. I mean, that's part of the reason why there's a daily bulletin. Every new name that comes in, we go through it, we pore over it. We've interviewed Mark Hughes and Mark Bowen, who have been linked to the Celtic job. I thought they were very impressive when we spoke to them. But the big issue around the names that have been mentioned for me, JP, is Roy Keane. And I'll tell you why I think it's an issue. I think that Dermot Desmond does have a liking for Roy Keane. I think that much has been confirmed. Is Roy Keane Desmond's itch that he needs to scratch? That worries me.
Hopefully not.
It would be absolutely crazy. I mean, I know that the guys were talking the other day about how the English media were building it up to be sort of Keane versus Gerrard and all that. But I mean, Keane played Gerrard on the pitch. It's not about marrying them up as managers. Do you know what I mean? There's a bigger picture here than just a headline for the sake of a headline.
Yeah.
There's a whole massive rebuild, and there's no evidence to show that Roy Keane has ever been part of that or could handle that if it was put in front of him to do. So, and I think you've got to also look at, did Natasha not do a poll about Roy Keane? And it was like overwhelming. I can't remember the percentage, but I remember when I clicked no, because I clicked no, obviously. When I clicked no, it came up. I'm sure it was 70-80%, maybe more. Natasha will be able to tell us, but so I mean, if you're going to, I know that's only a microcosm of the Celtic support, and it's not, that doesn't speak for everybody, but it's an example, and it's a worrying example for them if they do decide to go down that route, because it'll mend them if they do, because it's clearly not a popular decision.
No, and it's very, it's a short-term thing, isn't it? I mean, they're going for, get a big name in, sell the season tickets, but you're not looking beyond that. I mean, I think we opened up today's bulletin talking about something that's on the other end of the scale in terms of managerial, managerial ambitions, if you like. If you were to bring someone in with that long-term vision, I think that, it doesn't have that, what keeps getting called a box office appeal. But, I mean, how often has gone for a high-profile manager over the actual nuts and bolts of what the manager can do? How often does it actually work? I mean, this thing about them trying to bill it in the media, JP, it's just a nonsense, isn't it? I mean, they'd probably bill Lampard the same way, wouldn't they? Yeah. Lampard v Gerrard. It then becomes an English football story. So then they can appeal to an English fan base when they show the games on Sky Sports, for example. That's not what Celtic need. We don't need that. We need something that is actually going to be, going forward, let's say 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, a plan on how to build the success of the club, but also the infrastructure of the football department. And a massive part of that, obviously, is the youth that we've touched on, but also the recruitment. I mean, Roy Keane comes in. What would happen in terms of the recruitment? Someone at the moment has already started signing players for next season as well, and that's why I go back to what I says to Declan there. There has to be a joined up approach. That sounds like wanky corporate speak, but there needs to be a joined up approach between where we are just now and the incoming team. How can you sign a player and then present them to a new manager? Now, I know that there was an element of that when Wim Jansen came in. There were players that were already lined up to sign, and we saw through the signature. Same thing happened with Ronny Deila. Ronny Deila had nothing to do with Craig Gordon signing for Celtic, but he inherited him, and it wasn't a bad player to inherit, to be fair. And I think when you're looking at the incoming players at Celtic, you would hope that that's part of an assessment process, and you would hope that we are already in consultation, which would make me believe that the Ralph Rangnick situation will never happen at Celtic. Because obviously he's in a situation where he's been linked to the Germany job, and he had reportedly been approached for the Schalke job, and the Schalke board have denied that that's the case. They said it was a non-legitimate group who had actually asked them. Probably the rebels. I don't know if they're going through a takeover, hence the reason I wanted the foosball guys to come in. Hopefully they can come in and clarify all that. But will Roy Keane be on a shortlist at Celtic Park? I think he probably will. I actually think he probably will. And I think the influence of Dermot Desmond will be the reason behind that. And Davy Moyes. Imagine asking the Celtic fan base 12 months ago about Davy Moyes. You know what I mean? People would have been throwing things at the screen, JP. But I think back to 2015 it was the 30th anniversary of Jock Stein's passing. And they did a massive thing. The Celtic Foundation were involved in a fundraiser that took place at East End Park. I don't know if you remember it. James McAvoy played for Celtic. Davy Moyes was the manager of Celtic. Vinnie Jones played and all that. Can you remember the game?
For that, yeah.
And they'd done a big event in the evening time in Dunfermline, and Davy Moyes was one of the speakers. And I was at that event, and someone asked him the question. I think it was in Spain at the time, 2015. Someone asked him a question about coming back to Scotland to manage, and his answer that night was that he sees a time in the future where he would definitely come back to Scotland to manage. And all the Celtic fans in the room took that as read. I mean, who else is he going to manage? He wasn't talking about Dunfermline. All due respect, he did play with Dunfermline, but he didn't make that. And I came away thinking, well, he's either talking about international ambitions, or there's something whereby he wants to come and manage Celtic in the future. I've seen a story just over the last 24 hours linking Davy Moyes to Celtic. I mean, he's done a remarkable job at West Ham. He's the type of manager, I think, JP, that works better when given a long-term vision.
Yeah, I think we saw what happened at Manchester United, even Louis van Gaal. You know, after Moyes was not chased out, but I mean, he certainly, you know, he didn't do what he was supposed to do as a Manchester United manager. Jose Mourinho didn't do what he was supposed to do as a Manchester United manager. Yes, he won trophies. Yes, he got them back up to near where they were, but you know, they ultimately, nobody has succeeded since Sir Alex Ferguson as Manchester United manager. And I think Moyes, I was always a really big champion of Moyes when he was at Manchester United, because the way the press just jumped on him as soon as a few results went bad, it was just like, wow, like they're absolute ruthless. You know, there was no, let's give him a bit of time. He was taking over from one of the most successful manager in the English game. Mm-hmm. And they didn't give him any slack at all. It was just like, no, not good enough. He's a dud. Get him out. And I always had a bit of fondness. And before anybody gets into this, there's JP telling another story about somebody he met. I didn't meet him, but it was on my flight back from Seville. Davy Moyes was sitting about 4 seats back from me on my flight back from, it was actually Malaga. And I remember hearing Celtic fans behind me. I didn't speak to him, but I remember hearing Celtic fans behind me asking him if Wayne Rooney was a Celtic fan, because Wayne Rooney was obviously just coming through at that point. Yeah. And there was all the hype about him, and they were like, is Wayne Rooney, is Celtic his Scottish team and all that? Because there'd maybe been some chatter of it, and Moyes was like, no, he's an Everton fan, definitely an Everton fan. I just heard them say that. So I don't dislike Davy Moyes, but I just think with all the talk that we've had and the things that we've been kind of almost, you know, the carrot's been dangled with regards to the likes of a Jesse Marsh or an Enzo Maresca or just somebody with that kind of a different take on it. You know, I think Moyes is still going back to the whole Celtic connection, you know, former player, all of that, you know, and I get that is an aspect that needs to be explored, but I think we need to move away from that and move away from it with a positive and progressive, not regressive. And there's a appointment, not a disappointment. Progressive, not regressive. There you go. So,
I think progressive is the word when you think about the Harkin Maresca combination, and you look at someone like Jesse Marsh. Eddie Howe, Declan's a different proposition entirely. I look at an appointment of Eddie Howe being similar in nature to Brendan Rodgers, in that he would be looking at Celtic as a stepping stone. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, Paul. I think there's a risk if you go with one of these, you know, higher profile managers that after 2-3 years they're not going to be there and they're going to go out the door, and again you get left with the situation that we found ourselves in February 2019. And at that point again, do we go and give John Kennedy the job and say come in, win the cup and fire him into the position? You know, but we need to get away from that, and it's about building for the long-term future. Apologies for looking at my phone there. Bit of breaking news: Luke O'Connell has joined Queen's Park on loan until the end of the season. So, sorry to go away from the topic there, but just to give an update.
No, breaking news. I like that, Declan. But I mean, that takes us on to we've mentioned Queen's Park a few times, haven't we, on Axom, and that's a tremendous signing for them. You look at what Queen's Park have done just over the last year or so. Obviously, they've gone professional. You know, the Scotland's oldest club, and they were always amateur until recently. They've moved, obviously, from Hampden Park. They're now playing their home games, or will be playing their home games, at Lesser Hampden. Ray McKinnon's the manager. Leanne Dempster, some might say my lookalike, my doppelganger. Leanne Dempster is their CEO. I mean, Leanne Dempster went from Motherwell to Hibs to Queen's Park. I mean, what a coup that is.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And if they're bringing in players, and I'm saying of the standard, just last week I was saying he doesn't have a future at Celtic, but that's an excellent move for the player. But again, it shows Queen's Park's ambition. There's a club there that I have heard wish to be top 6 in Scotland. They want to be the 3rd biggest club in Scotland. It's an incredible bit of ambition. Obviously will require a huge amount of investment, which at this moment in time they currently do have. But Declan, thanks for that update, and sorry for interjecting. You were just you were commenting yourself on the Eddie Howe issues around appointing a manager like that. Yeah,
as I was saying there, I don't think going for one of these guys is going to benefit us long term again, because if you bring in a manager like this, the time span is going to be 2 to 3 years and you find yourself back at square one. To me, it's about appointing the right person as director of football, first of all, getting a good coaching, and then it becomes a system where if one person leaves that system, they're replaced very quickly, very easily, and it just goes back to a smooth running order, whereas just now we've just completely told that apart from the kind of early signs of what Brendan put in place at the football club to where we are now, where we're going to see our after first team players leaving the summer, a youth academy that's leaving so many young players, and a coaching setup that's run its course and needs changed.
There are a few accounts on Twitter that people reckon have got the ear of the Celtic board. You'll have seen them coming and going over the period, and you know which ones I'm talking about. But I was speaking to somebody. This is as bad as the flack you get, JP, for meeting famous folk as my sources. But I was speaking to someone who is close to the club and who reckons that there is going to be an incredible investment in the Celtic coaching staff and playing staff moving into next season. Now, when I was told that, I thought, right, okay, I know that you've got to get the league title back, but surely that level of investment is with bigger ambitions, and that theory wasn't quashed when I suggested that, and that's why I'm starting to think around I guess an escape route, for want of a better term, from Scottish football. Do they have ambitions beyond that? Is the managerial appointment going to be feeding into a much bigger picture at Celtic Football Club? It makes you wonder. But thanks for the update. I know that Colin Watt is going to be devastated, Declan, that Luke O'Connell is going to be leaving the building because he wanted him to be given a wee chance at Celtic. I mean, he's not really had an opportunity. But, going back to the managerial situation, JP, obviously another name that's been touted by some people who have worked with him is John Kennedy. And John Kennedy will be in charge of his first Celtic game against Rangers this weekend. Now, we're 45 minutes into this broadcast already. We haven't even taken a comment, and I will get on to the comments, I promise. It is. Aye, let's talk about music 55 minutes in. But let's have a look at this weekend's game. I wrote down a team line, a predicted team line, something that it wouldn't surprise me if he played. And from that team line, there was probably only 4 or 5 players I would expect to be at Celtic next season, it really shows you the magnitude of the rebuild at Celtic. JP, how do you think we're going to approach it? How do you think John Kennedy is going to approach this, the potential lineup? And do you have any fears for this weekend in terms of what we saw against Dundee United being pretty uninspiring?
Well, I mean, it was, but I mean, if you remember the first half, I mean, one of those shots goes in, and there was many. One of those shots goes in, it changes the complexion of the game. At the second half, I think it was like a case of them thinking, oh, well, we've thrown everything at it and nothing's happened, so, we'll just play out this sort of drab 0-0 draw, and then to see them go off the park with no real kind of I mean, it was almost because there was no fans there. There was no, reason to show disappointment or anything like that. There was no dropping to the knees. There was no sort of faux outrage or faux sadness even. It was just kind of like, oh, well, that's that then. Let's just walk off the park, which is a bit disheartening. So I don't know if it will be different this Sunday or not. I mean, you would like to think that the fact that of the nature of the opponents and what they've just done, and what we've seen and saw the endless gloating and, even their shirt sponsors putting out billboards and things like that. If that was me in that dressing room, I would want the game to happen, tomorrow, never mind Sunday. So I just hope that they've got that kind of fire in them to go out there and put in a performance, because everybody knows they're capable of it. It's still pretty much the same side. It's not as I know there's a few people that have got injured and a couple of departures, but I mean the nucleus of that team is made up of good football players. So it's about John Kennedy to show what he can do in this short term. And you've got to just wonder what it's like within the walls of Celtic Park. Is there a cloud, or is there an optimism? Because nobody knows really what's going on. You get the platitudes from the players and the set up interviews by Celtic, but I mean that's all very much kind of stage managed, and it doesn't feel natural almost. So I'd like to know what the genuine feeling is in the dressing room, rather than just this facade that we're presented with.
Yeah, I mean, it's something Neil Lennon spoke about, Declan, during the season, the fact that the players were crippled by the pressure of 10 in a row. That's gone. And I'm not saying that there's no stress or pressure playing for Celtic. There should be pressure on you no matter who you're playing. On a day-to-day basis, there should be a pressure on you at training to prove to the manager that you should be playing in front of whoever it is you're up against. So, yeah, it would be interesting to know if, that dark cloud has disbanded in some way, JP, and there is a freedom, if you like, because obviously the league is gone, or because again, the whole uncertainty of who's watching you day to day might not be there next season, and I think that would add into it. But you've got players there, Declan, who should be hungry. They should be hungry to show what they can do, especially in a big game, as it always is this Sunday. I mean, what's your thoughts on it? I don't think John Kennedy's stamped his own authority on the side. I think it's been very much, other than spells like JP mentioned, where we seem to be playing a wee bit more free-flowing in the first half against Dundee United, JP, I totally agree with that. I think it was 27 shots by the end of the game, and you would have normally expected one of them to go in. We certainly would expect from the players we've got to score a couple of goals in a scenario like that. How do you think we're going to approach it, Declan, and what's your prediction? What's your prediction for this Sunday?
I think one thing that might help us, Paul, is we're not sitting here talking about a possibility of Rangers coming to win the league at Celtic Park. As much as it was disappointing the way in which we lost the league at Tannadice, I think it might help some of the players, because we can see they've not handled pressure at all this season. That it's not a case of trying to stop that on Sunday. It's a case anyway of trying to stop Rangers going unbeaten for the season. That's enough motivation for any side, never mind the embarrassment that some of them have been put through and the gloating that they've saw in recent days. It might have done John Kennedy good to have 2 weeks kind of proper training with the first team as well. But I really don't know, because whether some players will want to prove themselves, whether that be to remain in the building next year, to get out the door in the summer. But the pressure, certainly the league title as well, gone. So to me, it's just about stepping up and proving that there's still decent enough players there, because we think there still is. But on Sunday, I think it'll be tight. Rangers obviously play European football tonight. Whether that affects them on Sunday, whether they change their team, obviously they're not home and dry against Slavia Prague yet. They'll face a tough tie tonight. Slavia did well at Leicester, so they'll be in for a tough game tonight. What that might do is give us something to build on Sunday, because obviously we won't be playing this evening. Might see a few Rangers players tiring, but Sunday's a big game for us. It's a big game for John Kennedy if he wants to try and put his name into the hat, because I think at this point in time that's gone, and it's a big chance for some players to really prove themselves. I think it'll be tight, but I would hope that some of the Celtic players would step up and put an end to Rangers' unbeaten run and show that they're still decent enough players.
That would be key. I'm going to have a look at some of the points coming through in relation to, the suggestion that someone like Jesse Marsh could come in. And Kaplan Mark, who's commenting on YouTube, states that Marsh is the right profile and philosophy. He has experience, success, and has clear thoughts on development of the squad. This is much more the right direction we should look at. By the way, I agree with that. I totally do agree with that. And, there is just that niggling thought, behind the scenes, JP, where someone might be pushing for a Roy Keane and thinking that that's the magic wand and we can go out and do what we always do and recruit, 5 or 6 players and hopefully 3 of them are decent and we'll win the league. We can't do that now. We've got a proper challenge. We're now the challengers. We are up against it in terms of just continuing as is, or has become the norm. David Bradley comes in to say, Celtic, we need a big performance on Sunday. I think the biggest thing for me is what Declan said. We've got to end that domestic dominance in terms of an invincible league campaign. It doesn't look to me like anyone is going to do that, so Celtic need to do it. And Magnet 67, Marsh and Rangnick would be a major step up and an indication of proper change. Absolutely agree with that. And interestingly, Shippy 67, Marsh and Howe, a dynamic, forward-thinking, their own philosophies, will show care and time for the youth, but are also coaches, and we have lacked that since Rodgers left. Coaches equals underperformed. Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Robert Hyland comes in to say Marsh and Rangnick would rock the international football community. Now, what I'm going to say from that point of view, Robert, is I'm almost resigned. Well, I'm completely resigned to losing Edouard in the summer. I think most of us are. We're also probably going to lose Ryan Christie and probably going to lose Chris Ayer. Now, as much as some Celtic fans don't rate the defensive ability of Chris Ayer, or indeed the ability of Ryan Christie, I think all 3 of those players would be big, big losses for Celtic. Now, if we were to show our hand and say, well, we are serious about being a contender in Europe, and the names that we've mentioned on the show today would suggest that we are, JP, do you think that might actually change the mind? I don't think it's ever going to happen with Edouard. It's too far down the line for Edouard, and it probably is time for him to move on. But players like Ayer and perhaps Christie might stay for another season or 2 longer than they would have done had we not made that appointment.
It depends on the level of ambition that's shown by sorry, no, that's not what I meant to say. It depends on the level of clubs that we're going to be coming in for the likes of Ayer, Christie and Edouard, because if the clubs that are coming in for them, to them, are underwhelming in terms of how they see their ability and how they see their career going, if we were to bring in a highly lauded coach with a proven track record of improving players, I mean, Jesse Marsh worked with Erling Haaland. So, you know what I mean? You've got a guy that can point to that as a recent example. I know it was only for 6 months, but he's obviously got a fondness and vice versa for the player. So I think potentially that could have an influence on their decision, because if they go, well, here's this guy coming in, he can develop you over the next season, possibly 2, and let's see who would be interested in you after those 2 seasons, because, you'd like to think that we would be aiming at the Champions League again. It feels like forever since we were in the Champions League. I mean, I don't know about you, but it actually feels like it's about, 5 or 6 years since we played in the Champions League. The
last time you heard that music, JP, would have been December 2017 against Anderlecht.
Right.
4 years come to 3 years, been a bit years.
And it actually feels like longer than that. So I think that's a possibility. Whether the both feet are out the door already with those players, who knows? We don't know. It's we're completely in the dark to that. But if you've said that you've heard that from a source about a serious investment, I'm not surprised. Like, why would we not do that at this point in time? It's clearly obvious that needs to happen. And by the way, I want to actually add something in here, because I get that there'll be the whole 55 and counting comments coming in and everything else, and you're just bitter about Rangers winning. I don't begrudge Rangers gloating at all, but this whole idea of it, Kings of Glasgow, and they're now the pendulum swung and they're going to win 10 in a row. Absolute nonsense. Please excuse me, I have someone at the door with a parcel. That's all right. Declan and I will continue until you come back. Now, see, when we're looking at the reaction of the very mention of Ryan Christie, Declan, so I'm going to bring in some of the mentions coming in from Facebook. Firstly, Christie has done nothing for us. I think he owes us big time. And Pa G, happy to see Christie go. And then David, I don't disagree with this. Turnbull is better than Christie, and if we get the right manager, they have loads of contacts. Absolutely. I think my concern is we're going into a period in the summer whereby, Colin and I went through the entire squad, and that included players like Luke O'Connell, and we spoke about how many of them might be leaving the building. So we took it for granted that all 4 loanees would be leaving, even though there might be a deal done for someone like El Yunusi. Quite a few of the younger players. There was upwards of 16, 17, as much as 18 players that might be leaving Celtic this summer, Declan, which is astonishing. And I think what we need to be really, really careful of is that we don't lose too much. Firstly, we don't lose too much of the experience, and that is where I made the argument around Scott Brown. Now, I was looking at the amount of seasons that every player has played first team football at Celtic within the squad. I was looking also at the amount of appearances that each of those players had made, and the top 5 at Celtic at the moment are Lee Griffiths, Scott Brown, Nir Beaton, James Forrest, Callum McGregor. So they are the 5 most experienced in terms of Celtic performances and the amount of time they've been at the club that we have. How many do you believe of those 5 will still be at Celtic next season, Declan?
Very little. I don't know. I think it's a bit of a mixture, with Lee. Fitness-wise this season, again, he's got 1 year in his contract. Whether we'll look to get him out the door, whether he can be trusted again, we don't know. I would certainly give Scott Brown a year extension. I hope Callum McGregor wants to hang around because I think Callum's an excellent footballer. Beaton, again, experienced. For me, I probably wouldn't have him around the building, but again, no, if you're looking for a rebuild, you don't want to have too many out the door. I'd probably be one I would be quite happy to let go of. But and James Forrest again will most definitely be there, and again a player we've missed this season due to injury, but we need to be careful. And quickly going back in Christie, he's our second biggest for assists this season, so he's not did nothing. He's not been at the same heights as last season, but he certainly contributed to an extent. And again, for him and Chris Ayer, I think it's going to depend as well on what's offered in the table contract-wise, because for money, some players both have achieved all they can at Celtic domestically. Whether they will look to go in for the riches in another league as another question. Another quick transfer update. Queen's Park have doubled their signings today. Ryan Mullins went to Queen's Park on loan too, so the phone's red hot today, and Queen's Park are pulling off all the big deals. I feel like Jim White here. Declan's got an in. Is it Leanne Dempster? Could you get her on the show? No, and it's not Sir Lord Willie either from Queen's Park, in case anybody put that together.
Well, I know we could start a rumour. A quick prediction for the weekend, JP.
Oh God. Well, I mean, the last Celtic Rangers game at Celtic Park that I watched out the back on a little bench at the back of my flat with my pal James, who's an Aberdeen fan, and there was a delay in my stream, so I actually heard someone scream for a goal. The second Rangers goal, I heard it happen before it happened on my stream. So from the corner kick that was happening, I was like, this is a goal, they're going to score here. And then the next thing, bang, goal. So it was an extremely surreal experience, and I'm sure Sunday will be another extremely surreal experience, because my seat is sitting empty at a ground half an hour along the road from me in my flat. It's horrible. With regards to the game, I think it'll probably be 1 each or something like that. I don't think it'll be anything that exciting as a game. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it'll be 1 each.
So JP thinks that Rangers will continue to be unbeaten in the league. Declan, do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-1 Celtic. As much as I've ripped the heart and soul out of me this year. I've still backed my team to beat Rangers, so 2-1 Celtic.
I love the positivity. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved in the comments on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to A State of Mind on YouTube. We are putting out daily content. Every single day, there's a number of broadcasts and pre-produced videos going out on the channel, so make sure that you subscribe. Scream of Celica, yeah. Aye, the Celtic stroke music crossover show. Brilliant. I love it. I really love it. And there's loads of other shows coming on. You might very soon be seeing Declan presenting his own show, but we'll have a wee chat about that at some point soon, Dec. But all that's left for me to say is thank you to Declan McConville and JP Mason for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.